They laughed when I filed for bankruptcy. He didn't laugh. He drove his fist into my jaw over a $200,000 loan in my name that I never signed. The irony wasn't lost on me as I tasted copper in my mouth, feeling the sharp edge of my compliance training cutting through the bourbon haze in that Cedar Falls living room. I came home to bury my grandfather, a decorated veteran. Instead, I found myself documenting bruises under fluorescent bathroom lights at 2:30 a.m., photographing evidence that would bury the man who dared call himself my mother's husband. If revenge is a dish best served cold, mine would be served with notarized signatures and federal fraud charges. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I hadn't set foot on Birch Lane in 3 years until that October morning when death brought me home. The mailbox still read Monroe, but someone had slapped a vinyl sticker over it, the Hollis family. 4 years of my mother's second marriage reduced to adhesive and denial. Cedar Falls hadn't changed, same Lutheran church dominating Main Street, same Hunter's trucks parked outside North Pike Tap at 11 a.m., same whispers following anyone who dared leave and return. The house, though, had transformed into Gary Hollis's shrine to mediocrity. Deer heads replaced family photos. Empty Maker's Mark bottles lined the kitchen windowsill like trophies. The hardwood floors my father installed bore fresh scratches from God knows what furniture dragged during drunken rages. Probably Rachel. My mother stood in the doorway, grayer than I remembered, wearing an apron I'd never seen. Helen Monroe had become Helen Hollis, complete with the nervous tick of checking over her shoulder. You came. Grandpa died. Mom. Where else would I be? The funeral was tomorrow. I'd driven straight from Chicago, my Chapter 13 bankruptcy papers still in my laptop bag, right next to the termination letter from Harbor and Field Credit Union. 34 years old, compliance specialist, and freshly destroyed by family debts I'd tried to shoulder alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 5 years ensuring other people's financial dealings were legal, only to have my own implode. Gary appeared around 6 p.m., bourbon already on his breath. 56 years old, potbelly straining against a Packers jersey, knuckles scarred from bar fights he probably started and definitely lost. He looked at me like I was something he'd scrape off his boot. Well, the princess returns. He dropped into my grandfather's recliner, and lit a cigarette despite Mom's timid protest. Heard you went belly up. Chapter 13. Right fucking embarrassing. I set down my coffee. It's handling debt responsibly, actually. Responsibly? He laughed, ash falling onto the armrest. You took out loans you couldn't pay. Now the whole county knows the Monroe name means deadbeat. Your grandfather's probably rolling in his casket. Gary. Mom started. Shut up, Helen. He didn't even look at her. Your daughter needs to hear this. That $200,000 you borrowed, that loan you fucked us with, now you're crying bankruptcy. The room tilted. What $200,000? His fist answered first, connecting with my cheekbone in an explosion of bourbon breath and rage. I hit the floor hard, tasting copper, my vision starring. Mom screamed something meaningless. Gary stood over me, knuckles already swelling. The home equity loan, you stupid bitch. Your name, your signature, your fucking bankruptcy making us look like trash. Through the pain, my compliance training kicked in. I'd never signed a home equity loan, never authorized one, never even discussed one. I stayed down, letting him think he'd won, while my phone recorded from my pocket. I'll teach you about respect, he slurred. But Mom finally found her spine, or at least her fear of murder charges, and pulled him toward the kitchen. I waited until I heard the TV blaring before I moved. The bathroom mirror showed the damaged swelling cheek, split lip, burst capillaries painting a purple constellation. I photographed everything under the harsh vanity lights. Then I crept to his study, a generous term for the room where he watched porn and passed out. The filing cabinet wasn't even locked. Drunk bastard's confidence. Maybe, or simple stupidity. There it was, Harbor and Field Credit Union home equity line of credit. $200,000 dated 2 years ago. My name. A signature that looked like mine if you squinted and had never worked in compliance. But I had. 5 years of examining documents, catching fraud, spotting forgeries. This signature was wrong. The M in Monroe too round. The R lacking my distinctive loop. More damning the witness signature. Gary's drinking buddy from the bar. I photographed every page, then found more casino receipts, pawn tickets for items I recognized Grandpa's medals, his watch, the ceremonial knife from Vietnam, all dated after the loan disbursement. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus Bradley, Grandpa's legal advisor. Rachel, sorry for your loss. Per your grandfather's instructions, check the envelope marked Monroe Addendum 2011 in his safety deposit box. Key is where he always kept it. I knew that hiding spot, under the loose floorboard in the basement, where Grandpa stored things that mattered. The key was still there, wrapped in plastic, waiting. Tomorrow's funeral would bury more than my grandfather. It would be the beginning of Gary Hollis's end. But first, I needed ice for my face and a lawyer who understood that revenge, properly executed, was just justice with better documentation. The courthouse opened at 8 a.m. I'd be there at 7:59. The safety deposit box at First National opened with a click that felt like destiny. Inside, among Grandpa's discharge papers and old photographs, lay a manila envelope marked in his shaky handwriting, Monroe Addendum 2011. My hands trembled as I unfolded the document not from fear, but from recognition. This was the ammunition I needed. The addendum was attached to the original mortgage paperwork from when Mom and I had to refinance after Dad died. I'd been serving with the National Guard then, barely 23, signing papers between deployments. But there, in subsection 14B, typed in unambiguous legalese, any alterations to property ownership, liens, or leveraging of assets associated with this mortgage require direct in-person signature from Rachel Marie Monroe during her period of military service 2011-2015 and written consent thereafter. Gary had fucked himself without knowing it. I made copies at the bank, then drove to the library where I could access Harbor and Field's online systems. My credentials were dead, but public records weren't. The HELOC application showed a submission date of March 15th, 2 years ago, at 3:45 p.m. I cross-referenced with my work calendar I'd been in Milwaukee that day, leading a compliance training seminar, 200 miles away, with 70 witnesses. The signature page made me laugh, actually laugh, despite my swollen face. Gary had practiced my signature, probably dozens of times, but he'd based it on my current style. My signature from the 2011 documents looked completely different. I'd changed it after identity theft paranoia struck during my compliance training. Any forensic analyst would spot the anachronism immediately. Back at the house, Mom was alone, sitting at the kitchen table with untouched coffee. She flinched when she saw my face in daylight. "He's at the funeral home," she whispered, "making arrangements." "Spending Grandpa's money, you mean?" I sat across from her, laying out the photographs. "When did you know about the loan?" "I didn't." She stopped, shoulders sagging. 6 months ago. The statement started coming. Gary said you'd agreed, that you'd signed before moving to Chicago. And you believed him. I wanted to. Tears tracked down her cheeks. The drinking got worse after his back injury. Disability wasn't enough. He said the loan would help us stay afloat, that you'd offered. "Mom," I pointed to the signature. "Look at this. Really look." She studied it, then pulled out her phone, comparing it to birthday cards I'd sent. Understanding dawned slowly, horribly. He forged it. He committed federal fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, forgery across state lines. I pulled up another document. "See this UCC-1 filing. He tried to use the house as collateral for another loan last month. Denied because of my bankruptcy filing." Mom's hands shook. "Rachel, if he goes to prison, then you'll be free." The word hung between us until we heard his truck in the driveway. Mom grabbed my wrist. "He keeps a gun in the garage, in the toolbox." I nodded, already pulling up Nate Whitaker's number. Grandpa's friend, semi-retired lawyer, and the only person in Cedar Falls who'd never given a damn about the Hollis family's supposed reputation. Nate, it's Rachel Monroe. I need an emergency protective order and a forensic document examiner. Yes, today. I have evidence of a $200,000 fraud. Gary stumbled through the door as I ended the call, reeking of whiskey at 1 in the afternoon. His eyes narrowed at my phone. Who you calling? Princess, my lawyer. I stood, keeping the table between us. You forged my signature on a home equity loan. I have proof. The silence stretched until he laughed ugly, dismissive. Prove it. I held up my phone, showing the doorbell camera footage I'd pulled from the cloud. There he was. Last night at 11:17 p.m. Clearly visible and clearly audible. Burn the paperwork before Monday. All of it. His face went from red to purple. You recording me in my own house, Grandpa's house, which you borrowed against using my forged signature while I was serving my country. That's a federal crime. Gary, ask your buddy at the bar. Oh wait, he's complicit. He witnessed a forged signature. Gary lunged, but this time I was ready. I sidestepped, letting momentum carry him into the wall. Mom screamed. I kept recording. Touch me again, I said clearly. And this goes straight to the FBI. Fraud, assault, theft of veteran property. They love cases like this. He turned, fists clenched, but something in my face stopped him. Maybe it was the smile, the same cold smile I'd perfected during 5 years of catching liars at their own game. Monday morning, I continued, we're filing for an injunction. The house is frozen, no transfers, no sales, no loans. Your casino buddy, Big Eddie. He'll have to find another mark. You can't. I'm a compliance specialist. Gary. I can and I will. I picked up my bag, documents secure inside. Oh, and that gun in your toolbox. Possessing a firearm while under a restraining order is another felony. Nate's filing the paperwork at 3 p.m. As I walked to my car, I heard Mom's voice, stronger than it had been in years. Get out of my father's house. The doorbell camera would catch whatever happened next, but I had work to do. Grandpa's funeral was tomorrow, and I planned to honor him the only way that mattered by burning Gary's life down with the very papers he'd used to build it. Grandpa's funeral should have been about honor and remembrance. Instead, it became a masterclass in small-town poison. They whispered behind their hymn books, these good Christians of Cedar Falls, crafting my narrative without bothering to check the facts. Heard she bankrupted the whole family. Poor Helen, having to deal with that shame. Some gratitude, after everything Gary's done for them. Mrs. Patterson, who'd bought Girl Scout cookies from me 20 years ago, actually moved her purse when I walked past. Tom Brennan from the hardware store muttered something about big city failures coming home to roost. Even Pastor Williams seemed to rush through the service, eager to distance himself from the Monroe family disgrace. Gary sat in the front row like a grieving son, accepting condolences with practiced humility. He'd cleaned up nice fresh shave, borrowed suit, not even stumbling. The concerned husband, the devoted stepson, the poor man dealing with his stepdaughter's financial irresponsibility. He'd spun the story perfectly. I'd taken out massive loans, fled to Chicago, then crawled back to declare bankruptcy and dump my mess on the family. Federal investigations take time. Nate had warned me that morning. Meanwhile, he's got the narrative. But narratives could be rewritten. After the service, at the VFW hall reception, I watched Gary work the room. Every handshake, every sympathetic nod, every beer someone bought him, I documented it all. Because while Gary played the victim, I'd spent the morning filing paperwork that would flip the script entirely. The emergency protective order had been granted at 9 a.m. The sheriff would serve it tonight, but that was just to the start. Rachel, Margaret Keating, Grandpa's neighbor, touched my arm gently. Unlike the others, her eyes held concern, not judgment. How are you holding up, dear? I'm documenting everything, Mrs. the Keating. I showed her my phone, recording the room. For the lawyers. She frowned. Lawyers at your grandfather's funeral. Did you know Gary sold Grandpa's Purple Heart last month and his service medals pawned them at Cash Express on Highway 12? Her face went pale. That's not possible. Your grandfather would never. Grandpa was dying. Gary had power of attorney for household matters, not for the estate, though that's theft. Mrs. Keating's expression shifted from shock to anger. She'd been married to a veteran herself, understood what those medals meant. Do you have proof? I showed her the pawn receipts I'd photographed. Her hand went to her mouth. Within 10 minutes, she was whispering to the other veterans' wives. 20 minutes, and the VFW commander was staring at Gary with undisguised contempt. 30 minutes, and the narrative had its first crack. My phone buzzed. 3 messages from former colleagues at Harbor and Field, all variations of, saw the filing. Is it true about the forgery? The financial sector was small, incestuous. Word traveled fast when someone filed fraud charges against a credit union loan. By Monday, every compliance officer in the Midwest would know Gary Hollis had forged signatures on a HELOC, but Gary didn't know that yet. He was holding court by the bar, telling his version how I'd begged him for money, how I'd signed papers then conveniently forgot, how my bankruptcy was a scheme to avoid responsibility. Breaks Helen's heart, he said loudly, ensuring everyone heard. Girl's own grandfather would be ashamed, serving his country while his granddaughter destroys his family's reputation. That's when I played my card. Actually, I said, stepping into his circle, Grandpa knew exactly what was happening. That's why he left me this. I held up the addendum, copies for anyone who wanted to read. Subsection 14B. Any loan against the house requires my physical signature. Not possible when the loan was filed. I was in Milwaukee, teaching a seminar for the Federal Reserve. 73 attendees, plus hotel records, plus this. I pulled up the metadata from the electronic filing. Submitted from IP address 192.168.1.42, Gary's home computer, same one he uses for DraftKings. The silence was beautiful. Gary's face cycled through emotions: confusion, rage, fear. You're lying. The FBI doesn't think so. Neither does the U.S. Attorney's Office. I let that sink in. Stealing from a veteran's estate while committing wire fraud. They're very interested. Someone dropped a beer bottle. It shattered on the linoleum, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Gary stepped toward me, fists clenched, but 3 veterans moved between us. Not to protect me, they probably still believed his lies, but because you didn't start fights at a military funeral. This ain't over, Gary hissed. No, I agreed, pulling up the doorbell footage on my phone, casting it to the hall's TV screen. There was Gary. Last night. Crystal clear, 200 grand is mine. This bankrupt bitch needs to learn respect. Then the kick him on the phone this morning. Outside the funeral home. Didn't know about the new camera I'd installed. Burn everything in the filing cabinet. Tonight. Don't care if Helen's there? The hall erupted. Helen's friends surrounded her, pulling her away from Gary. The veterans closed ranks, their judgment final. The narrative hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. But the best part, the part that would haunt Gary forever, I leaned in close, whispered just for him. Grandpa knew what you were the day Mom married you. That's why he changed his will. That's why he gave me the documentation. He knew you'd try something like this. I smiled. Cold as February. He called it his dead man's switch. Even dead, he beat you. The sheriff walked in at 4:27 p.m., right as Gary threw the punch that would add assault to his charges. This time, everyone saw it. This time, 30 witnesses couldn't be dismissed. As they cuffed him, I touched my swollen cheek, both old and new bruises now, and made sure everyone saw that too. The good Christians of Cedar Falls might gossip, but they loved a victim story even more. And I'd just given them a better one. Local veteran's granddaughter exposes stepfather's fraud while honoring grandfather's memory. By morning, I wouldn't be the woman who bankrupted her family. I'd be the woman who fought back. Sheriff Valdez arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, search warrant in hand. Not the pot-bellied good old boy I'd expected, but a sharp-eyed woman who'd driven up from the county seat specifically for this. Ms. Monroe? She nodded. All business. Judge Martinez was very interested in your filing. Forgery, wire fraud, elder abuse that's federal territory. Mom sat at the kitchen table, smaller than I'd ever seen her. She'd aged 5 years overnight, but her hands were steady as she signed the consent forms. The safe combination is his birthday backwards, she said quietly. 031467. The safe was in the basement, hidden behind a fake panel Gary had installed himself. Inside, we found his entire scheme laid out like a confession. Jesus Christ, Deputy Ramirez whistled. He kept everything. Bank statements showing the HELOC deposits, printouts of gambling sites with 6-figure losses, receipts from North Pike Tap totaling thousands charged to a credit card opened in my name 3 months ago. Email drafts to someone named Eddie Torino. The military bitch is finally gone. House will be clear to flip by December. But the real treasure was a handwritten ledger. Gary's chicken scratch documenting every dollar. March 16th. Took $20K to Rivers Casino. March 18th. Eddie's covering poker loss $30K by April. April 2nd. Sold metals $1,800. Each entry more damning than the last. Sheriff Valdez photographed everything while I helped Mom understand the scope. Gary hadn't just stolen $200,000. He'd been bleeding the estate dry, selling Grandpa's possessions, maxing out credit cards he'd opened using Mom's information, even negotiating with developers about selling the house once Grandpa died. Here, Mom suddenly said, pulling a key from under the sink. His other hiding spot. The garage freezer, behind packages of venison from hunting seasons Gary never participated in, held a fireproof box. Inside Mom's original birth certificate, her Social Security card, and 3 life insurance policies I'd never known existed, one on Grandpa, one on Mom, one on me, all purchased in the last year, all naming Gary as sole beneficiary. Ma'am, Sheriff Valdez's voice had gone deadly serious. Has your husband ever suggested you change your medications? Any unexplained illnesses? Mom's face went white. He's been bringing me tea every night, for my nerves, he said. I've been so tired lately. They bagged the tea, the cups, everything. What started as fraud investigation was shifting into something darker. Then I found the folder marked RM background, my background. Every address I'd lived at in Chicago, photos of my apartment building, my work schedule at Harbor and Field, printouts of my LinkedIn profile, my Facebook, even my dating profiles from apps I'd deleted months ago. Sticky notes in Gary's writing, lives alone 3rd floor, leaves work 7 p.m. Tuesdays, drinks at Murphy's on Fridays. He was stalking me. My voice sounded distant, clinical. Planning something. Sheriff Valdez immediately called for additional units. What we found next confirmed it a burner phone with texts to someone saved as Chicago Guy. The messages were careful, coded, but clear enough Gary had been arranging for something to happen to me. The bankruptcy had disrupted his timeline, brought me home before he was ready. October 15th. One message read, after the grandfather's gone. Make it look random. Today was October 12th. We need you both in protective custody. Sheriff Valdez said, now, but I wasn't finished. While they processed evidence, I opened Gary's laptop password saved, because of course it was. His email revealed the full network. Eddie Torino wasn't just a gambling buddy, but a connected loan shark. The developer interested in the house had mob ties. Gary owed nearly $500,000 across various debts, was using my forged signature to float loans, planning to cash in life insurance policies to cover the spread. One email thread made me nauseous. Gary discussing with Eddie how to handle the compliance bitch who might notice discrepancies. Dated 6 months ago when the forged loans started appearing. They'd been planning my accident for months. Found something, Deputy Ramirez called from the garage, under the workbench, wrapped in plastic cash, Tens of thousands in small bills, a Glock 19 with the serial number filed off, and a single key. Storage unit, Mom said dully. Highways storage on Route 12, Unit 47. Sheriff Valdez sent units immediately. What they found would make the evening news more weapons, drugs packaged for sale, and documents for 5 different identities, all variations of Gary Hollis. Your stepfather isn't just a gambling addict, Sheriff Valdez told us 3 hours later, after Mom and I had been moved to a secure location. He's been running money for the Torino family. The house, your grandfather's estate, it was all meant to be a laundering operation. Mom broke down completely. 20 minutes of sobbing that 4 years of marriage had earned, but when she was done, something had hardened in her face. I'll testify, she said. Whatever you need. Mrs. Hollis. Monroe, Mom corrected. Helen Monroe. I want my name back. That evening, as federal agents descended on Cedar Falls, I sat with Mom in a hotel room 2 counties away, watching the news report. Gary's arrest was the lead story, not just fraud now, but conspiracy, racketeering, attempted murder for hire. They're freezing everything connected to him, I told Mom, reading updates from Nate. But the house is protected. The addendum Grandpa had me sign, it shields the property from any claims related to fraudulent loans. Mom stared at the TV showing Gary in handcuffs. Federal agents walking him to a van. He killed your grandfather, didn't he? The stress, the threats. I couldn't answer, but we both knew. My phone rang. Nate Whitaker, sounding grimmer than I'd ever heard him. Rachel. They found something else in that storage unit. Pictures of your father's accident scene, from angles the police never photographed. The room spun. Dad had died in a single-car accident 5 years ago. Bad weather, they'd said. Lost control on black ice. Are you saying, I'm saying Gary Hollis has been planning this much longer than anyone thought, and we're going to bury him with his own evidence. The war shifted to public opinion while Gary sat in federal holding. His lawyer, some strip mall attorney named Derek Paulson, tried spinning it as a misunderstanding, but I had weapons he didn't know existed, 5 years of compliance expertise and a bone-deep understanding of financial forensics. I started with the signatures. Using software from my harbor and field days, I created a timeline visualization showing every document Gary had forged. The local news ate it up. I gave them exclusive access to my analysis, complete with overlays showing the mathematical impossibility of my signature appearing in Cedar Falls while I was logged into secure systems in Chicago. Look at the pen pressure patterns, I explained to Channel 7's reporter, highlighting the microscopic differences. Every person has unique biometric markers in their handwriting. Gary copied the shape but couldn't replicate the velocity or pressure. This is textbook forgery. The story went viral in Wisconsin financial circles. Suddenly, other victims emerged. 3 local businesses reported suspicious loans. An elderly widow discovered her deceased husband's pension had been redirected. Gary's fraud wasn't isolated, it was systematic. But my real ammunition came from an unexpected source, Gary's brother Mike, who'd been arrested trying to intimidate us, flipped immediately when faced with federal charges. You want documents? Mike laughed bitterly in the recorded interview Nate shared with me. Gary kept everything, thought he was building a case to frame Rachel if things went south. The irony was delicious. Gary's insurance became evidence of premeditation. I weaponized every piece, created a website, the Gary Hollis Files, posted redacted documents showing the forgery timeline, built an interactive map of where I'd actually been when each fraudulent signature appeared, cross-referenced his casino visits with loan disbursements, perfect correlation. The Veterans Association got involved when I posted receipts from Cash Express. Gary hadn't just pawned Grandpa's medals, he'd sold memorabilia from 6 other deceased veterans, all stolen from estates he'd accessed through Mom's church connections. Photos of him wearing a Purple Heart at bars, claiming combat service he'd never earned. Stolen valor plus fraud, posted the Wisconsin VFW commander. This man is a disgrace. Mrs. Keating became my unexpected ally, rallying Grandpa's military friends. They shared the website across veteran networks. Within 48 hours, Gary Hollis was nationally infamous in military circles, the worst kind of predator, feeding on those who'd served. I kept pushing. Found Gary's DraftKings account through subpoenaed records, screenshotted his betting history, 300,000 lost in 2 years, always spiking after he'd accessed fraudulent funds. Posted it with a simple caption, "Your loans at work." The prosecutor, ADA Jennifer Storm, called me directly. "Your documentation is better than what most forensic accountants produce. Would you consider consulting?" "I want him buried," I said simply. "Use everything." Gary tried fighting back through Paulson, claiming I'd manipulated evidence, that my bankruptcy proved I was desperate enough to frame him. But I had an answer for that too. Posted my complete financial history online, every loan, every payment, every struggle. Showed how I'd taken on family debts after Dad died, trying to keep Mom afloat while she grieved. Documented Gary's arrival, how the debts mysteriously multiplied after he moved in, how Mom's credit cards suddenly maxed out, how my credit was used without authorization. I declared bankruptcy because of him, I wrote. Chapter 13, the kind where you pay back what you can, not running from responsibility, taking it on. The contrast was stark. Me, transparently showing financial hardship while taking responsibility. Gary, stealing from veterans and plotting murder while gambling away borrowed money. Then came the smoking gun, delivered by Eddie Torino himself, who'd cut a deal with the feds. Audio recordings of Gary from their business meetings. Gary's voice, clear as day. "The grandfather's dying. Once he's gone, the stepdaughter has an accident. The wife signs everything over grieving. Clean slate, $3 million in property. Insurance pays out nearly $1 million. I posted the transcript. The public explosion was immediate, but I saved the best for Gary's bail hearing. While Paulson argued Gary wasn't a flight risk, I submitted evidence I'd been holding back Gary's search history from the past 6 months, subpoenaed from his ISP. How to fake your own death, countries without extradition, buying foreign citizenship, untraceable poison for tea, making murders look accidental, how much life insurance pays for accidents. The judge's face went stone cold. Bail denied. Defendant remanded to federal custody pending trial. Gary exploded, screaming about frame-ups and conspiracies, had to be physically restrained. The courtroom sketch artist captured it perfectly. Gary, red-faced and snarling, being dragged away while I sat calmly with my laptop, documenting everything. That night, Mom and I sat in our hotel room, finally able to breathe. She'd filed for emergency divorce, reclaimed her maiden name, started therapy. The house would be returned to us, cleared of all fraudulent liens. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said quietly. "You fought like he taught you, smart, strategic, ruthless when necessary." My phone buzzed. An email from Harbor and Field's senior management. "Rachel, given recent events and your exceptional documentation skills, would you consider returning as senior compliance director? Your expertise in fraud detection is clearly unparalleled." I smiled, typing my response. "My consulting rate is $500 per hour. First case full audit of any loans connected to Gary Hollis or Eddie Torino networks." They agreed within an hour. Gary would spent decades in federal prison, but I wasn't done. Every loan he'd touched, every person he'd defrauded, every crime he'd committed, I would document it all. Build such an overwhelming case that even his future parole board would choke on the evidence. He'd stolen money. I'd stolen his future, one perfectly documented crime at a time. The website hit 1 million views that week. Other victims started reaching out, not just of Gary, but of similar frauds. My inbox filled with requests for help, for consultation, for hope. I'd found my new calling: weaponizing paperwork against predators, making compliance into combat, turning financial forensics into a form of justice Gary never saw coming. Paulson's offer came through Nate at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, reeking of desperation wrapped in legal letterhead. "My client is willing to settle all civil claims for $60,000, paid in installments, in exchange for dropping criminal charges." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee on the forensic accounting report I'd been preparing. $60,000 against $200,000 stolen, plus attempted murder, plus conspiracy, plus a dozen other federal charges. Counteroffer. I told Nate. $0. In exchange, Gary provides full written confession, complete accounting of all stolen funds, location of all pawned veteran items, lists of every co-conspirator, and permanent relinquishment of any claim to the house or Helen's assets. They'll never accept that, Nate warned. Then we go to trial. I've got 8 bankers' boxes of evidence and time to burn. 2 days later, Gary tried a different approach. His brother Mike showed up at the hotel violation of the protective order with 2 men I didn't recognize. Hotel security intercepted them in the lobby, but not before cameras caught Mike saying, "Just need to collect Gary's personal belongings. 5 minutes." The belongings they wanted were in the house's hidden compartments. I knew because I'd found them the night before. Working with Sheriff Valdez and a construction contractor, we'd systematically taken apart Gary's additions to the house. Behind bathroom drywall, $40,000 in cash. Under basement floorboards, he'd personally installed gold coins worth $90,000. Inside a fake HVAC duct, 3 hard drives containing enough cryptocurrency wallet information to give the FBI crypto division heart palpitations. But the masterpiece was in the garage attic, accessed through a hidden panel I found using Dad's old stud finder. Gary's insurance policy documents implicating Eddie Torino in murders going back 15 years, recordings of conversations with corrupt cops, photos that would end political careers. Gary hadn't just been a small-time criminal. He'd been building leverage. "This is why they want to settle," Sheriff Valdez said, examining the evidence. "Gary knows too much. Torino needs him silent." That changed everything. The FBI moved Mom and me to a safer location while they processed what I'd found. But I wasn't sitting idle, using secure channels. I kept documenting, kept building the case. Then came the golden discovery, hidden in plain sight. While digitizing Grandpa's papers for the estate, I found carbon copies of letters he'd written but never sent, stored in his old Army footlocker. One dated 3 months before his death. "To whom it may concern, I, Colonel James Monroe Rhett, being of sound mind, hereby document my concerns about Gary Hollis. I've observed him tampering with my medication, overheard discussions about my death being soon and profitable. I've changed my will accordingly, leaving specific instructions for my granddaughter Rachel, whom I trust to handle this appropriately. The house's original deed contains protections I've never disclosed Rachel's father, and I added them in 2009, knowing Helen might remarry poorly. No liens, loans, or transfers are valid without authentication from both the estate lawyer and a blood relative. Gary Hollis has no legal claim to anything. Attached was a sealed envelope. For Rachel open only if Gary acts against our family. Inside, photos. Gary didn't know existed. Grandpa had installed a hidden camera in his room 6 months before dying. Screenshots of Gary grinding extra pills into Grandpa's coffee. Gary going through Grandpa's papers at 3 a.m. Gary on the phone. Old bastard's taking too long to die. The final photo stopped my heart. Dad's car. The night he died. Taken from Grandpa's security system. A vehicle following him. Enhanced by Grandpa somehow. The license plate visible registered to Eddie Torino's nephew. Grandpa had known, had suspected Dad was murdered, had been building his own case when his health failed. His note, "Rachel, I taught you to fight with honor, but some enemies don't deserve honor. Destroy him. Love. Grandpa. P.S. Check the frame of your father's portrait." The portrait hung in what had been Gary's study. Behind it, sealed in plastic, a USB drive containing every financial record from the past 5 years. Gary's real books, not just gambling debts but money laundering for Torino, bribes to city officials, tax evasion that would make the IRS salivate. Grandpa had been playing a longer game than any of us knew, dying while gathering evidence, trusting I'd find it, use it, weaponize it appropriately. I called Ada Storm directly. "I have evidence that turns this from fraud into RICO. Gary Hollis was Torino's money man, and I can prove they killed my father." The silence on her end stretched long. "Don't send this electronically. I'm coming to you with a full FBI escort." That afternoon, as federal agents carefully cataloged Grandpa's evidence, I sat with Mom, showing her the letters Grandpa had written. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew. And he prepared. Every document, every protection he set Gary up to hang himself." Mom cried then, not from sadness, but from rage. "I brought that monster into our home. And Grandpa made sure we could destroy him for it." My phone rang. Paulson, sounding panicked. "Ms. Monroe, my client would like to revisit the settlement. Your client can rot." I hung up. 3 hours later, news broke Eddie Torino arrested on RICO charges. 17 co-conspirators named. Gary Hollis listed as star witness if he cooperated. If not, he'd face additional charges including conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. The house of cards was collapsing. And Gary, who'd thought he was a player, was just another card getting crushed in the fall. That night, I raised a glass of Grandpa's bourbon found in his footlocker, saved for a special occasion to his portrait. "You magnificent bastard. You knew I'd finish what you started." Tomorrow, Gary would learn the real settlement terms: full cooperation or life without parole. Either way, he was finished, but more importantly, Dad would finally have justice. The frame had one more secret: a photo of Dad and me at my college graduation. His writing on back: "My daughter, the fighter, love forever, Dad." Both my fathers had believed in me. Now I'd honor them both by ensuring Gary Hollis lost everything, one perfectly documented crime at a time. The Winnebago County Courthouse stood gray against October rain at 7:45 a.m. I'd dressed carefully navy suit, minimal makeup over fading bruises, Dad's West Point class ring on my right hand. Every detail calculated to remind the court who the real victim was. The courtroom filled quickly. Media had caught wind of the RICO connection, turning our family fraud case into something bigger. Gary sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, shackled, his attorney Paulson looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Martha Crawford presided Grandpa's contemporary, a veteran herself. She'd seen the evidence folders I'd compiled, each tabbed and indexed like a compliance audit from hell. 4 boxes of documentation sat on the prosecution's table, my handiwork visible in every precisely labeled divider. "The court will hear case 2025 CF 447 State v. Gary Hollis," she announced, voice cutting through murmurs. "Charges include wire fraud, forgery, identity theft, conspiracy to commit murder, violations of the Stolen Valor Act, and 16 additional federal counts." Ada Storm stood, heels clicking with military precision. "Your Honor, the state presents evidence that Mr. Hollis systematically defrauded the Monroe family while planning multiple murders for financial gain." What followed was a prosecutorial massacre. Exhibit A, the original addendum, 14B-E, authenticated by 3 independent document experts. The provision requiring my physical signature during military service made every loan Gary had taken absolutely void. "Mr. Hollis knew about this provision," Storm announced, presenting Gary's own handwritten notes. He wrote, quote, "Need to wait until after Rachel's discharge to avoid military protection clause." He knew, and he proceeded anyway. Exhibit B through G. The forensic signature analysis I'd prepared, projected on courtroom screens. Side-by-side comparisons showing the mathematical impossibility of my signatures being genuine, pen pressure algorithms, stroke velocity charts, microscopic hesitation marks where Gary had traced my name. The defendant practiced Ms. Monroe's signature 137 times, Storm noted, showing practice sheets we'd found. Premeditation defined. Then came the financial evidence. I'd built a PowerPoint that Storm presented every dollar tracked, every gambling loss documented, every timeline correlation between theft and casino visits proven beyond doubt. March 16th, 2 p.m. Storm read from my report. $200,000 deposited into an account Mr. Hollis controlled. March 16th, 6 p.m., 100,000 cash withdrawn. March 17th, 3 a.m. Gary Hollis lost 97,000 at Rivers Casino. The money lasted less than 12 hours. Gary's face had gone from red to gray. But we were just beginning. Exhibit H. The doorbell and hidden camera footage. The court watched Gary punch me, threaten me, discuss burning evidence. Watched him on the phone with Eddie Torino. The stepdaughters handled. Accident happens next week. Conspiracy to commit murder, Judge Crawford stated flatly. Continue. The veterans in the gallery stirred when Storm presented the stolen valor evidence. Photos of Gary wearing purchased medals, claiming combat service at VFW halls, using fabricated military history to gain trust. Then the pawnshop receipts Grandpa's Purple Heart sold for $800. The medals belonged to Colonel James Monroe, Storm announced, who earned them in Vietnam, 1969 through 1971. Mr. Hollis sold them while Colonel Monroe was dying, using power of attorney meant for medical decisions. Mrs. Keating, sitting with the veteran contingent, audibly sobbed. Then came Grandpa's evidence, the USB drive contents, authenticated by FBI technicians. Gary's real books showing money laundering, tax evasion, bribes, the photos of him poisoning Grandpa's coffee, the recording of him saying, "Old bastard's taking too long to die." The defendant systematically poisoned Colonel Monroe with excessive doses of his heart medication, Storm explained, showing toxicology reports from Grandpa's autopsy we'd requested. Digitalis levels were 3 times therapeutic dose. But the courtroom went completely silent when Storm presented the evidence about Dad. 5 years ago, Daniel Monroe died in what was ruled a weather-related accident. New evidence suggests otherwise. She played the enhanced security footage showing the vehicle following Dad. This car is registered to Anthony Torino, nephew of Edward Torino. Phone records show Gary Hollis called Anthony Torino 17 times the week before Daniel Monroe's death. Mom broke down in the gallery. I held her hand, kept my eyes on Gary. The defendant, Storm continued, began planning this scheme before even marrying Helen Monroe. He targeted a grieving widow with a valuable house and a dying father-in-law with veteran benefits. Paulson's defense was pathetic. He tried arguing entrapment, evidence tampering, unclear documentation. Each attempt collapsed against the mountain of proof. When Paulson questioned the authenticity of my signature analysis, I was called as a witness. "Ms. Monroe," Storm asked, "please explain your expertise in document verification." 5 years as Senior Compliance Specialist at Harbor and Field Credit Union, certified in Forensic Document Examination, Financial Fraud Investigation, and BSA AML Compliance. I've testified in 17 prior cases involving forgery. And your analysis of these signatures. I walked the court through each forgery with surgical precision, using the laser pointer to highlight discrepancies invisible to untrained eyes. Mr. Hollis made 3 consistent errors over-rotating the capital R, insufficient pressure on the downstroke of M, and a telling hesitation mark where he lifted the pen, something natural signatures never have. Could you be mistaken? No, I have location data, employment records, and 73 witnesses placing me in Milwaukee when this signature allegedly happened in Cedar Falls. It's not just improbable, it's impossible. When Paulson cross-examined, trying to use my bankruptcy against me, I was ready. You filed Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Correct. Doesn't that show financial irresponsibility? Chapter 13 is reorganization, not liquidation. I'm paying back every creditor possible despite debts I never actually incurred, debts created by Mr. Hollis's fraud. My bankruptcy is evidence of his crime, not my irresponsibility. The jury nodded. Several took notes. Then came character witnesses. 14 veterans testified about the stolen medals. Mom testified about the poisoned tea, the hidden debts, the threats. Mike Hollis, in exchange for a plea deal, testified that Gary had detailed plans for my accident, a hit and run, scheduled for October 15th. After 6 hours of devastating evidence, closing arguments were almost redundant. Storm simply pointed to the evidence boxes. That is one family's destruction, documented in paper. The defendant didn't just steal money. He murdered a father, poisoned a grandfather, planned to kill a daughter, and destroyed a widow's life. He dishonored veterans living and dead. He chose greed over every human decency. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Gary lunged at me as they read the verdict, screaming obscenities. You fucking bitch. That money was mine. I earned it putting up with your pathetic family. The guards tackled him, but not before everyone saw his true face. The mask finally, completely gone. Judge Crawford's voice was ice. Mr. Hollis, you're remanded to federal custody pending sentencing. Given the murder conspiracy charges and your outburst, I'm recommending maximum sentences to run consecutively, not concurrently. As they dragged Gary away, I stood and spoke clearly. I declared bankruptcy in money. You declared bankruptcy in character. Guess which one's permanent? The November wind cut sharp as I stood on Birch Lane, watching contractors tear down Gary's additions to the house. Every cheap panel, every hidden compartment, every trace of his presence gone. The demolition felt like exorcism. Original hardwood still good underneath, the foreman noted, pulling up Gary's nasty carpet. Your dad did quality work, built to last. Mom stood beside me, divorce papers finalized, maiden name restored, Helen Monroe again, though she'd never be the same woman who'd married Gary 4 years ago. Therapy had helped, but trust would take longer to rebuild. Your grandfather's things arrived, she said quietly. The Veterans Network had pooled resources, tracking down every item Gary had pawned. Grandpa's Purple Heart, his service medals, the ceremonial knife, his watch all returned at cost. They'd refused to let me pay, insisting it was about honor, not money. Inside, I supervised the restoration. Gary's trophy deer heads came down, replaced with family photos he'd hidden in the basement. The gun cabinet became a bookshelf again. The dining room table he'd scarred with cigarette burns was refinished, revealing Dad's initials carved underneath from when he'd built it. In Grandpa's room, now cleared of medical equipment, I hung his medals in a shadow box beside his portrait. Below it, a small plaque. Colonel James Monroe, 1943-2025. He fought his last battle from beyond. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m. Mrs. Keating with a casserole and an envelope. From the VFW, she explained. For the legal expenses, inside a check for $30,000, memo line reading, Monroe Family Defense Fund. I can't accept this. You exposed a man who stole from 13 veteran families. Mrs. Keating interrupted. You gave them closure. Take it. That evening, as Mom and I ate dinner at the restored table, my phone buzzed with the final settlement notice. The house was clear, no liens, no claims, protected by an irrevocable trust I'd created. The Monroe House Preservation Trust, with provisions Grandpa would have loved. The property could never be mortgaged, never be seized for debt, only passed to blood relatives or sold with unanimous family consent. He can't hurt us anymore, Mom said, reading the documents. No one can. Not like this. We'd installed new security systems, cameras, and financial monitoring. Every account required dual authentication. Mom attended financial literacy classes, learning what she should have known years ago. I'd moved back temporarily, working remotely for 3 firms doing fraud investigation. My reputation rebuilt stronger than before. The bankruptcy court had been understanding once the fraud was exposed. Chapter 13 converted to Chapter 7, debts directly linked to Gary's fraud discharged. My credit would recover. My reputation already had. At 9 p.m., I stood in the basement where Gary had hidden his secrets. Now it held filing cabinets of evidence copies, everything digitized and backed up. The FBI had the originals, building cases against 17 other members of Torino's network. Gary's testimony given to avoid life without parole had destroyed an entire criminal organization. He'd get 35 years minimum, no parole for federal charges. At 56, it was effectively life. He'd die in prison. knowing I'd put him there with his own paperwork. The local news had called it the paper trail murder plot, focusing on how documentation had solved attempted murder. The financial press called it compliance as weapon, studying how I'd used banking regulations to expose crime. The veteran community called it justice, plain and simple. But I called it something else, writing the final entry in the case journal I'd kept November 15th. The Monroe house stands free. Gary Hollis proved that paper could steal everything: money, property, identity, peace. But paper cuts both ways. Every document he created to destroy us became evidence to destroy him. He thought bankruptcy meant weakness, defeat, starting over with nothing. He was wrong. Bankruptcy was just restructuring for the real fight. I lost money. He lost everything that matters: freedom, reputation, future. The accounts are balanced. I closed the journal and placed it in the filing cabinet, labeled simply Monroe v. Hollis closed. Outside, freezing rain pelted the windows. The house creaked and settled, sounding like Grandpa's satisfied sigh. On the lawn, a small sign stood proud against the weather: Monroe house built right, kept right, defended right. Mom found me there an hour later, staring at old photos. You did it, Rachel. You honored them both. We did it, I corrected. We survived. She hugged me then. The first real embrace since before Gary. We were different people now, harder, smarter, less trusting. But we were free. The house was ours. The truth was documented. And somewhere in federal prison, Gary Hollis was learning what real bankruptcy meant, not of money, but of soul. Every day for decades. Waking up knowing a compliance specialist had buried him with his own evidence. I'd traded temporary financial bankruptcy for his permanent moral bankruptcy. The exchange rate was perfect. The rain stopped. Mom made tea, testing it with the kit we now kept. Paranoid but practical. We sat in Grandpa's favorite spot, looking at the portraits of the men who'd loved this house, protected this family, trusted me to finish what they couldn't. I declared bankruptcy in money, I said, raising my cup in a toast to their photos. Gary declared bankruptcy in humanity. Only one of those is recoverable. The house stood solid around us, built right, kept right, finally safe. The paper war was over. We'd won. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in my situation? Your perspectives mean everything to me.